Hello and welcome. I'm Pip Tomson and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Syria's opposition group reach Aleppo as they say they've taken control of towns and villages in the surrounding area. Russia's defence minister touches down in North Korea for talks with political leaders, cementing the two countries' military ties. The UK could legalise assisted dying after an historic vote by MPs. And President Macron is the guest of honour at Notre-Dame's cathedral, which has been given a €700 million renovation following the devastating 2019 fire. Thousands of Syrian opposition fighters are approaching the centre of Aleppo in Syria as they attempt to recapture the city for the first time since 2016. They've taken control of dozens of towns and cities in the surrounding countryside, despite being confronted by the Syrian military and Iranian proxies. Public transport in Aleppo to Damascus has been diverted, according to Syrian media. For more on this, I'm joined in the studio by Al Arabiya's military expert, Riad Kahwaji. Hello to you, Riad. Thanks ever so much for coming in to talk to me about this, because it is incredibly significant. As I just said there, it's the first time since government forces recaptured it in 2016 that these opposition groups have got into Aleppo. Give me the background to this offensive and also what the possible ramifications are.
This is an offensive that started 48 hours ago, and from the first glance we can see a major intelligence failure on the part of the Syrians and their Russian allies. They could not see these forces massing and launching this blitzkrieg that managed to capture the entire western side of Aleppo's province and parts of the southern side of Aleppo, the whole countryside, the major highway linking Aleppo with Damascus, cutting off supply route to the city itself. This is a major failure here on the part of the Syrian regime, and then a surprise retreat. These forces have advanced with barely any serious resistance from the Syrian military. Also, the Iranian proxies were not there in the big numbers because, as you remember, only 48 hours ago, there was a ceasefire in Lebanon.
Okay, so let me just ask you about the timing of this then. It can't be just coincidence, and they've been very speedy in doing this, haven't they? And why didn't the Syrian regime see it coming?
This happened 24 hours after the ceasefire agreement was reached in Lebanon. Many people don't see this as a coincidence that we see this move, because at that time, many of the Iranian proxies were massing in southern Syria. They were anticipating some sort of an Israeli offensive from the Golan towards the Bekaa through Syrian territories. So a lot of the Iranian proxies who have moved to the south, this emptied the way, cleared the way for the Syrian opposition forces in launching this surprise offensive and making these considerable gains. The regime don't seem able to hold them back. There are many people who are expecting to see Aleppo, the city, fall completely to the hands of the opposition, which something did not even happen during the time of the civil war, before the regime recaptured it in 2016.
And Aleppo is Syria's second largest city.
This is the second largest city. This is the commercial capital of Syria. This is the heartland. This is what many Syrians report to it as the green part of Syria. This is where a lot of the agriculture, the industry, the business, especially with Turkey, with the Kurdish areas. So it is a major, major setback for the regime to lose this Aleppo as a province, as well as the city itself.
And Aleppo, I mean, it's been quiet, hasn't it, for the last 8 years?
It's been quiet. I think the regime felt that it's all over for the opposition. They have them cornered in Idlib, the province of Idlib. They've been pounding them, you know, the Russian Air Force, the Syrian Air Force. Every now and then they carry out few air raids here and there. And there was a sense that the regime felt that it was safe. The regime even went as far as letting go of many of the reserves, of the conscripts. He sent them home a few months ago, believing that it's all over. And they were not anticipating any major battles. And they saw these opposition forces as something that is on the retreat, and they will be fading away anytime soon.
One last question. The Iranian foreign minister has stressed support, continued support for the Syrian government in light of this offensive. Do they actually have the capacity, though, to support the government?
Well, this is part of a power struggle. You know, Iran is trying to retain its control inside Syria. As we know, the Iranian regime played a big role in saving the regime. It sent a lot of its militias, it sent Hezbollah, and they're the ones who helped convince the Russians to come in, and they rescued the regime altogether. And now they have been vying for more power. Many see that now the Russians might not want the Iranians to stay in there to compete with them for control in the area. Also, Turkey has its own interest. Turkey has been trying to reach a deal with the regime that would take into consideration some political changes inside Syria. This definitely does not suit the Iranian side. So Iran now, they saw what happened in Gaza. They lost Hamas. We saw what happened in Lebanon, the degrading of Hezbollah's capabilities. And now a setback in Syria. Definitely it is not going for the Iranian regime, it is not going their way in the region now.
Thank you so much for your analysis. Al Arabia's military expert, Riad Kahwaji.
Thank you.
To Russia now, and the country's defence minister, Andrei Belousov, has landed in North Korea to speak with military and political leaders. It's been reported that North Korea has sent more than 10,000 soldiers to fight for Russia recently, as well as allegedly providing them with military aid. It comes as Ukrainian officials reveal Russia has lost more than 2,000 troops over the past 24 hours. Let's get the latest from Moscow on this by talking to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Hello again to you, Dasha. What is this meeting all about then? Has it happened, and what lines are coming out of it?
Well, indeed, a very interesting visit that we are seeing now by the Russian defense minister to the DPRK. Andrei Belousov has come there without any announcements being made prior, but that's yet another visit by the high-ranking Russian officials to the North Korean capital. We understand that Andrei Belousov has said that the relations between Moscow and Pyongyang are good neighborly relations which have trustful nature and partnership at its core. He also has said that there is a very important dialogue taking place between the leaders of the two countries, which is also beneficial for the continuation of these close ties. He also has stressed the importance of the signing of the comprehensive partnership agreement that has been negotiated by the two sides earlier this year, and said that this is going to play a very important role and sort of stabilizing factor for the stability of the region. He also has said that's going to become the factor of preventing the possibility of having more military conflicts in the area of the DPRK, and said that this is going to become one of the centerpieces of the entire Eurasian security. So certainly we understand that the two sides have a lot to discuss, because the military cooperation is included into this strategic partnership agreement. And this is the area that has been also attracting the attention of the Western observers who have been talking and raising concerns about what this cooperation can actually entail.
How much help has North Korea provided Russia with so far? And actually, what reputation do North Korea's soldiers have on the battlefield?
Well, it's an interesting question that is really hard to answer because the Russian officials have neither denied or not confirmed the presence of the North Korean soldiers in Russia. There have been allegations from the Western media about the presence of those fighters in the area of the so-called special military operation, especially in the Kursk region, which has been under the parts of which have been under the Ukrainian control since August. And Russia has never said if that was actually the case with regards to those North Korean fighters being present there. However, what we have seen was the very accelerated pace of the Russian military over the course of the past months. We have seen the Russian armed forces saying that they have been making advances on the Donetsk direction. Or also, we understand that there have been improvements when it comes to this Kursk region, with the Ukrainian troops, according to the Russian officials, being slowly but surely squeezed out from the Russian territory.
It has been claimed that Russia has seen the highest number of soldiers die in just one single day. Will that have any impact on Putin, do you think, when it comes to ending this war?
Well, it has been reported not by the Russian sources, so therefore it's not reported widely in the Russian Federation. So for the wider audience, what they have is the official statements from the Russian Ministry of Defense, which is not providing data of that sort. And therefore, in Russia, there is a very clear understanding, at least among the wider population, that there has been the inevitable need to start this operation in Ukraine. And therefore, at this moment, no matter whether people supported the launch of the operation at the very beginning or they opposed it, at this moment there is the wider consensus that Russia is not going to agree to any sort of freezing this conflict or get into the negotiating table when the positions of Russia are not taken into account. So these numbers are not quite going to reach the Russian audience or have any impact here domestically.
Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you. To Ukraine, and 3 of the country's nuclear power plants have scaled back electricity production after Russia's attack on Kyiv's electrical grid yesterday. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Ukraine's energy infrastructure is extremely fragile and vulnerable, putting nuclear safety at great risk. It comes as President Zelensky spoke with Germany's Olaf Scholz today. That's despite criticising the country's Chancellor for a previous phone call with Vladimir Putin. Here's what he said on the 15th of November.
Chancellor
Scholz told me he was going to call Putin. Olaf's call, in my opinion, is Pandora's box. Now there may be other conversations, other calls, just a lot of words. And this is exactly what Putin has long wanted. It is extremely important for him to weaken his isolation of Russia, and conduct talks as ordinary talks, which won't have any results, the way he did it for decades. It gave Russia a chance not to change anything in its policy, not to do anything real. It led to this war. We understand the challenges now. We know how to act. We would like to warn that there will be no new Minsk agreement. We need real peace. Glory to Ukraine.
Chancellor
Scholz told me he was going to call Putin. Olaf's call, in my opinion, is Pandora's box. Now there may be other conversations, other calls, just a lot of words. And this is exactly what Putin has long wanted. It is extremely important for him to weaken his isolation of Russia, and conduct talks as ordinary talks, which won't have any results, the way he did it for decades. It gave Russia a chance not to change anything in its policy, not to do anything real. It led to this war. We understand the challenges now. We know how to act. We would like to warn that there will be no new Minsk agreement. We need real peace. Glory to Ukraine.
Мінська 3 не буде. Нам потрібен реальний мир. Слава Україні!
Let's take a look at some other stories making headlines today. Voters across Ireland have gone to the polls in the country's general election after a 3-week campaign. They're choosing who they want to serve as their next leader in the Dáil, that's the lower house of Ireland's parliament. Airlines and airports in India received 999 hoax bomb threats this year. That's according to the country's Deputy Civil Aviation Minister. That's 10 more than the previous year, with more than 500 received in the last 2 weeks of October, causing a disruption in services and flight schedules. And a list of no-go holiday destinations has been revealed today, with Barcelona and Bali on the list. Travel publication Fodor says tourism is placing unsustainable pressures on the land and local communities. To the United Kingdom now, and assisted dying could become law there after MPs voted convincingly in favour of the historic bill. It means adults who are terminally ill and given 6 months to live could request medical assistance to end their lives. It's a decision which has divided MPs throughout Westminster, including those who belong to the same political party. Here's what 2 of them had to say in Parliament a little earlier.
It's estimated that over 600 terminally ill people take their own lives every year. How can we allow this, but not a compassionate and humane assisted death? I have been astonished by the number of people who have been in touch with me to tell me about their terminally ill loved ones who have starved themselves to death. People talk about a slippery slope, but the Health and Social Care Select Committee found that not one jurisdiction which passed laws on the basis of terminal illness has expanded its scope. And none of the jurisdictions which have introduced... It's absolutely true. We are not talking about a choice between life or death. We are talking about giving dying people a choice of how to die.
My late mother lived with chronic illness all her life. And I knew that one day her pain would be too unbearable for her. But she did not let that limit her. She wanted to live. And I believe this bill would protect the wishes. This bill would not protect the wishes of her, people in her situation today. Because freedom in death is only possible if you have had freedom in life.
Let's go live to our correspondent, Olly Barratt in London. Hello to you, Olly. As we were seeing there, this vote, incredibly divisive, but actually the debate was very calm, it was respectful, there were so many personal stories, it was highly emotional.
It absolutely was, and Kim Leadbeater, who we heard from there and who was the MP that brought this legislation in the first place, says that she thinks it showed Parliament at its best. It was a respectful debate. It was very emotional at times. A lot of the parliamentarians that took part shared personal stories about mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, husbands, wives, or stories about constituents that they represent as well. And although there are very strong opinions on either side of the debate, the tone in the House of Commons was, for the most part, very respectful indeed, and sombre at times as well. We didn't know right up until the vote took place exactly which way it was going to go, because there were still quite a lot of parliamentarians that hadn't declared their view publicly. And so I think Kim Leadbeater will have been very pleased indeed with what ended up being a fairly comfortable majority of 50-odd members of Parliament when that vote finally took place.
Yeah, and I think it was the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, wasn't it? He actually voted in favour of this new law. But the bill does not become law yet. There are a few hurdles to clear. Just talk us through what happens next.
quite a few hurdles potentially to clear. Yes, there is the so-called committee stage, the report stage in Parliament. The MPs in the House of Commons get to scrutinise the legislation in its current form and also try and potentially suggest changes to it from its current form. It also has to go for scrutiny to the upper chamber, the House of Lords as well. There will be a series of votes. The MP that is leading this legislation, as I say, Kim Leadbeater, she thinks that we could be in the place of having a final vote on this legislation in 6 months or so from now. I think other MPs feel that's fairly optimistic. It could take even a year to get to that stage. It is entirely possible still that actually in the end the legislation could be voted down if MPs either change their mind or some of those who were minded to vote for it in principle at this stage but want to see changes if they don't feel that the changes that they would like to see are added to the legislation. So there's a long way to go before it becomes law. Even when it becomes law, there's probably a year or two after that before the government can work out exactly how to implement it, the training, the funding that the National Health Service might need to go ahead with this very controversial legislation. So we're probably at least 2 or 3 years away from this coming into effect if, as I say, and it remains an if, it does eventually pass through both chambers of the Houses of Parliament.
It's something, Olly, that campaigners have been working on for decades, including the terminally ill broadcaster Dame Esther Ranson. What has been her reaction tonight and the reaction of some others?
She's talked about being delighted. She's talked about her admiration for Kim Leadbeater, the Labour MP who has brought this legislation forward. You can imagine that opponents of the bill are saying that they're very disappointed, among them Danny Kruger MP, who effectively led the opposition in the House of Commons. He says now he will work to try and get this legislation changed. There are campaign groups and activist groups on either side of this debate who are saying similar things as well. It is very controversial, and we really did hear emotive arguments on either side. Kim Leadbeater's view is that there are enough safeguards in this legislation. She says that it is for adults who are terminally ill. You have to get the approval of 2 doctors to go ahead. You have to be of sound mental capacity yourself to make the request in the first place. There are lots of guardrails, she says, that can make sure that this is about helping terminally ill people right at the end of their lives. As I say, opponents of the legislation say that they don't feel there are enough safeguards in place. They worry about coercion of patients, and many MPs have also been saying they do have some concerns about exactly how much time lawmakers have had to scrutinise the legislation even to get to this point for this first vote today. So still controversial, still a long way to go, but certainly Kim Leadbeater and her supporters and the people who support this legislation say they're delighted in what is a historic moment for England and Wales. This is something that hasn't been debated in the House of Commons properly in terms of legislation for a decade, and supporters of the legislation felt that if it went against them today, it could have been another decade before they got a similar opportunity.
Thank you for talking us through it. Olly Barratt in London. Let's bring you the latest business news now. And Black Friday sales have been happening right around the world today, with shoppers grabbing bargains both in store and online. In the US, the National Retail Federation predicted shoppers would increase their spending this year, with sales of around $1 trillion. That's despite concerns about inflation and the cost of living. And Virgin Australia can start selling airline tickets for a new flight between Doha and 4 Australian cities after getting approval from the country's watchdog earlier today. 28 weekly return routes from Doha will now include Brisbane, Melbourne, Perth and Sydney. Turning to a bit of sports news, and the nominations are in for this year's FIFA Awards. Manchester City's Rodri and Erling Haaland are both up for gongs in the Best Male Player category, alongside Real Madrid's Jude Bellingham and Inter Miami's Lionel Messi. Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola is nominated for Coach of the Year. He won the same award in 2023. And the annual Emirates Dubai Sevens, the biggest sport and entertainment festival in the Middle East, has kicked off today. More than 5,000 athletes from around the world will take part in rugby, netball and cricket at the Sevens Stadium, with British rap singer Stormzy scheduled to take to the stage tomorrow night. French President Emmanuel Macron was in Paris today to get a first look inside the revamped Notre-Dame Cathedral ahead of its reopening next week. The iconic medieval building caught fire in 2019, and as a result, the 19th century spire fell and the inside was badly damaged after 600 firefighters took 15 hours to put out the flames. 700 million euros has been spent on the renovations, and the French president, his wife, and the Archbishop of Paris were the first visitors earlier today. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Syria's opposition group reach Aleppo as they say they've taken control of towns and villages in the area. Russia's defense minister touches down in North Korea for talks with political leaders, cementing the two countries' military ties. The UK could legalise assisted dying after an historic vote by MPs. And President Macron is the guest of honour at Notre-Dame's Cathedral, which has been given a €700 million renovation following the devastating 2019 fire. That's just about it from us on W News. Thank you for joining us this Friday. Coming up next is the Riz Khan Show, and later join Tom Burgess-Watson for GNT. From all of us here, a very good night.